My name is Astrid Bergland. I'm 37 years old, and I'm a licensed general contractor in Minnesota. In 14 years I have signed off on 61 commercial buildings worth $240 million. On the second Sunday in September, my younger sister set her fork down at my dining table and called a meeting to order. Starting Sunday, Dustin's parents get your room, Britta said. They already sold their house. You can sleep downstairs. My mother reached for the potatoes. My father studied his plate. Nobody argued. I smiled and said, okay. Britta had lived under my roof for 3 years and had never once read the only piece of paper in that house that mattered. I had. Twice that week. Welcome to my channel, where ordinary people face impossible family moments and walk out with their dignity intact. If you've ever been the one everybody borrows from and nobody thanks, the one who gets called when the furnace dies and forgotten when the thank yous get handed out, this story is for you. If that's you, go ahead and subscribe now. It helps more than you know. But let me back up. I grew up in Coon Rapids, in a split level my father bought in 1986 with a down payment his mother put together in Hibbing. My grandmother's name was Solveig. She had worked in the office at Hibbing Taconite for 31 years, and she raised my father to believe 2 things, that you never let a Bergland go without, and that you never say out loud when it costs you something. My father, Sig, spent 28 years driving haul truck on the Iron Range and then in aggregate down in the metro. My mother, Arlise, ran the kitchen at Zion Lutheran on Johnson Street for most of my childhood. Between them they gave me a work ethic and a silence problem. In our family, you did not make a thing of it. Whatever it was. You brought a hot dish, you shoveled somebody's wok, and you did not make a thing of it. I was 10 when my sister was born. I was already the one who held the flashlight. The winter I was 21, the pilot on our furnace blew out during an ice storm and the house dropped to 44 degrees before my father got the panel off. Britta was 11. She lay on her stomach on the basement floor in a snowmobile suit and held the light steady for 40 minutes while he worked, and she never let it shake once, and when he finally got the flame to catch she said, "Did I do good?" I still think about that. I want you to know she was a real person to me. She wasn't born the woman at my table. I didn't go to a 4-year school. At 19 I took a labor job on a hotel shell in Bloomington for $12.50 an hour and learned I could stand outside all day in February and still want to come back. At 22 I enrolled at Dunwoody College of Technology, finishing a construction management program at night while framing houses in the daytime. At 26 I got my Minnesota residential building contractor license, BC 631948. At 30 I started Bergland Build with 1 truck, 1 nail gun, and a used trailer with a bad axle. By the time I turned 37, I had 22 employees, a shop off Broadway Street Northeast, and a wall of certificates of substantial completion I never framed because I was always too busy to hang them. In 14 years I have never once missed a certificate of occupancy date. I mention that because it is the only thing I have ever bragged about, and because it is the reason I did not do the obvious thing when my sister finally pushed too far. Here's what I did with that money, year after year. In 2014, my sister wrapped her Cavalier around a light pole on Hanson Boulevard. She wasn't hurt. She was uninsured, which she had not mentioned to anyone. I paid $6,200 for a used Corolla with 84,000 miles on it and told her to pay me back whenever. She never did. She never mentioned it again either, which somehow bothered me more. In 2016 and 2017, I covered $9,400 of her tuition at Anoka Ramsey and her rent on a studio in Fridley. She dropped the program in the second semester of the second year. I found out in October, from a cousin. In 2020, the shingles on my parents' split level failed after a hailstorm and their claim came back short. I put a new roof on it. My crew did the labor on a Saturday, and I paid $11,800 for materials and dumpsters and permit fees out of my own account. My father stood in the driveway with his hands in his pockets, and he said the thing he always said. "Family's load-bearing, Astrid." That was his phrase. He'd used it my whole life. He said it the way other men say amen. Family's load-bearing. It meant somebody in a family has to carry the weight so the rest of it stands up, and everybody at that table understood, without anyone saying it, that the somebody was me. In 2022, Britta got engaged to a man she left 4 months later, and I ate $3,100 in non-refundable deposits on a barn venue near Elk River. My mother called it a blessing in disguise. Nobody called it money. I never once said no in 15 years. That's not a brag. That's the confession part. Now, the house. In March of 2016 I bought a 1913 Foursquare at 2814 Ulysses Street Northeast in the Audubon Park neighborhood of Minneapolis, for $268,000. It was 2,240 square feet of trouble. It had knob-end tube wiring in 2/3 of the walls, a cast-iron waste stack with a hairline crack you could hear more than see, and a northeast corner of the foundation that had settled 2 inches since the Coolidge administration. I bought it because I could see what it wanted to be. Over the next 4 winters I put $141,000 and roughly 900 hours of my own labor into that house. I pulled every permit. I hired licensed trades for everything I wasn't licensed to touch, because that is what you do. I jacked and repointed the northeast corner. I rewired the whole structure and passed rough-in on the first inspection. I stripped 96 years of paint off the original Cortison oak trim with a heat gun and a dental pick, 1 baluster at a time, listening to podcasts about shipwrecks. There is one name on the deed. There has always been one name on the deed. There is one name on the mortgage note, one name on the homeowner's policy, HO2214877, and one name on the Hennepin County homestead application. That name is mine. I want to be very precise about that, because everything that comes later hangs on it. In October of 2021, Britta called me from a Holiday Station parking lot in Blaine at 11:40 at night. Her boyfriend had put her things on the curb. She was 24 and she was crying so hard she couldn't tell me which exit she was at. I drove out and got her. Of course I did. 6 weeks, she said, in my kitchen, at 1 o'clock in the morning, holding a mug she never washed. 6 weeks and I'll be out of your hair. I told her to take the front bedroom, the one with the window seat I'd built. I told her not to worry about rent. I want to be honest here, because I've thought about this a lot since. I didn't offer that out of pure generosity. I offered it because saying the number out loud felt rude, and because in my family we don't make a thing of it, and because some part of me liked being the one who could. I never wrote a lease. I never asked for $1. I never gave her a receipt, because there was nothing to receipt. The mortgage, the taxes, and the insurance came to $1,940 a month, and every month it came out of the Bergland Build owner's draw, and every month my sister slept upstairs and I did not make a thing of it. 6 weeks became a season. A season became a year. By the fall of 2022 she had a job at a med spa in Northeast and a key on a red fob and opinions about my kitchen. I want to introduce 2 more people, because they matter later. The first is Odell Vang. He's 61 and he has run Finnish carpentry for me for 19 years, since before there was a company to run it for. Odell can hang a door in a 1913 house where nothing is square and make it swing shut on its own from any position you leave it. He was doing the built-ins in my dining room that fall, on a subcontract with a balance of $38,400 left on it. The second is Frances Boyum. She's 58, she has practiced landlord-tenant law in Hennepin County for 30 years, and she had handled the tenant side of a duplex rehab my company did on Fillmore Street. She is the only lawyer I have ever met who says "I don't know yet" out loud. And I should mention my insurance agent, Lorna Tvet, out of the Central Avenue office, who once told me over the phone, in the flat voice of a woman who has said it 1,000 times, that a homeowner's policy is written on the assumption that the owner lives there and nobody is paying her rent. I said, sure. I wrote it on a sticky note and stuck it inside my job binder and forgot about it for 2 years. That's the whole set of tools laid out on the bench. A deed with one name. A mortgage with one name. A policy that assumed I lived in my own house. A carpenter. a lawyer, a father's phrase, and a sister who had begun, somewhere in the second year, to say our house. I heard it the first time at Thanksgiving in 2022. She was showing a friend the newel post I'd spent 3 weekends refinishing and she said, "Yeah, we did all this." I didn't correct her. I passed the gravy. You have to understand, in my family, correcting somebody at the table is a bigger sin than lying at it. There's a particular kind of politeness up here that people from other places mistake for warmth. Sometimes it's a lid. My mother could hold a lid on a boiling pot for 40 years. When my aunt got divorced, we didn't discuss it. We brought bars to the church basement and talked about the roads. Nobody in my family has ever said a hard true sentence out loud at full volume. We say that's different, we say well, and we let it go, and whoever has the most room left in her absorbs what we let go of. I had the most room. A paid-off truck, a company with 22 employees, no children. In February of 2023 my parents' furnace finally quit for good, the same one Britta had held the flashlight for. It was 9 below that week. I had a new 96% unit and a line set in their basement within 30 hours, and I paid $7,850 for it, and when my mother tried to hand me a check for $400 she'd gotten from a tax refund, my father put his hand over hers and said, "Oh, for heaven's sake, Arlies. She's fine. She's fine." That was the family's entire accounting system, right there in 2 words. I loaded my empty tool bags into the truck and drove home to Ulysses Street and let myself into a house where my sister had rearranged my living room while I was gone. Dust and crawl came into the house in April of 2023, the way water comes into a basement. Not all at once. You don't notice the first inch. He was 31. He introduced himself in my own kitchen, leaning on my counter with a beer from my refrigerator, as an asset consultant. When I asked what that meant, he said credit repair and tenant advocacy. What he actually was, I learned later from a man I know who runs property management in St. Cloud, was a former leasing agent, 2 years at the front desk of a 240-unit complex, let go in 2021. Which meant he knew exactly enough about Minnesota landlord-tenant law to be dangerous, and not 1 page more. He started with weekends. Then Thursday through Monday. Then his coats appeared in the front hall closet, his shoes on the mat by the side door, and by August he had a razor on the edge of my sink and a preferred side of the couch. Nobody asked me. Not once did anybody form the sentence. In September of 2023 a package came addressed to Dust and Crawl, 2814, Ulysses Street Northeast. Then a second one. Then an envelope from a bank. I mentioned it lightly, the way we do up here, and Britta said, "He changed his mailing address, it's not a big deal." He asked me twice to put his name on the Excel account. For his credit, he said. I told him the account was in the company's name because the shop and the house shared a billing arrangement, a lie I told to avoid an argument, and the single luckiest lie I have ever told. By that winter my house had gotten loud in a way that old houses aren't supposed to be. Music at 1 o'clock in the morning. Wet boots on the oak I'd stripped by hand. A ring on the dining table where somebody set down a candle without a coaster and then put a placemat over it so I wouldn't see. The first real break came in March of 2024. I got back from a Thursday walk through in Egan at 4:15 in the afternoon and my office was gone. I use the word literally. My first floor office, the room with the built-in flat files Odell had made, where I kept 11 years of job binders and every set of drawings I'd ever stamped, had been emptied. My plan table was standing on end in the garage with a moving blanket over it. My flat files were in the driveway. In the rain. Inside the room there was a leather sectional, a floor lamp, a whiteboard, and a mini split head bolted to my exterior wall. I stood in the doorway for a long time. Then I did what I always do when I don't know what I'm looking at, I started reading the building. There was a new opening cut through the wall between the office and the front hall. Rough framed, no header, a 2x4 laid flat across the top of the opening like a shelf. The lath and plaster had been broken out and the debris shoveled into contractor bags that were still sitting in the corner. There was a new 240-volt receptacle beside the mini-split, fed by orange Romex that ran up the wall in a surface-mounted raceway, into the ceiling, and I went down and opened my panel to be sure, landed on a double-pole breaker somebody had shoved into a slot that was not rated for a tandem. No permit. No licensed electrician. No inspection. Cut framing in a load-bearing wall of a 1913 balloon-framed house. If you're not in this business, that might sound like a decorating dispute. It isn't. I hold a state license. My license number is on file with the Department of Labor and Industry. Unpermitted structural and electrical work at an address where the licensed contractor is the owner-occupant is not a slap on the wrist. It's a complaint, a hearing, and potentially my ability to feed 22 families. On top of that, an unpermitted alteration is the single fastest way to have a homeowner's claim denied. If that raceway had cooked off inside a balloon-framed wall cavity with no fire blocking, the house would have gone up like a chimney, and my carrier would have had every right to look at that panel and hand me nothing. Britta came in behind me with her arms crossed. "Dustin needs a client space," she said. "You don't even use that room, you're never home." I said, "There's no permit. It's a couch, Astrid. There's a hole in a bearing wall and a 240 circuit on a slot that isn't rated for it." She looked at me the way you look at somebody who has brought up the wrong subject at a funeral. "You always have to make everything so technical," she said. Dustin appeared in the doorway with a coffee and said, "My guy's licensed, he just doesn't do the paperwork side. Saves everybody money. I have been on job sites since I was 19. I know exactly what that sentence means." I didn't yell. I went out into the rain and carried my flat files into the garage one drawer at a time, and it took me 4 trips, and nobody came out to help. The next week I pulled the permit myself, retroactively, and hired a master electrician to make it right, because leaving it was not something I could live with. It cost $4,300 and took a day. Getting a permit for work you didn't authorize on your own house is a humiliating errand. The city inspector, a decent guy named Rudy, looked at the raceway, then at me, then at the raceway. "Somebody was in a hurry," he said. "Somebody was," I said. Then, in April, they went after Odell. Odell Vang had been in my house 3 days a week that spring, building the dining room cabinets. He works quiet. He hums Mun lullabies to himself when he's cutting crown. He'd been with me 19 years and he had $38,400 left on his subcontract for that job. On a Tuesday, Britta left him a voicemail. She didn't say it to his face and she didn't say it to me. In the voicemail she told him the household was going in a different direction, that he had been weird about the mess in the kitchen, and that he shouldn't come back. He was 61 years old and he stood in my driveway with his miter saw already loaded and his stand still folded under his arm, and he said, "Astrid, I don't want to make a problem. I have been angry maybe 6 times in my adult life. That was one." I paid the balance of the contract in full that afternoon, all $38,400, for work he hadn't finished, because the reason he hadn't finished it was mine to own and not his. Then I put him on salary at the shop with the millwork division under his name. 4 months later my accountant papered it and I gave him 15% of the company. He tried to say no twice. I told him the paperwork was already filed, which by then it was. That night I moved my bed to the 3rd floor. The attic of a 1913 Foursquare is a real room if you make it one. I'd insulated it, run a mini-split and put a subfloor down, and then never trimmed it out, because the client, me, kept getting bumped down the schedule. So there was a bed, a lamp, a rolling rack, and bare rafters with the roof sheathing nails poking through like a mouthful of teeth. I lived up there 5 months. In my own house. At the top of my own stairs. People ask why I didn't just leave. 2 reasons, both boring, and boring is usually where the truth lives. My homeowner's policy is written for an owner who lives in the house. So is my homestead classification with Hennepin County. The minute I moved out and left 3 unrelated adults in there, I'd have a rental, which needs a different policy, a rental license from the city, and a different tax classification. I'd have built, with my own hands, the exact legal situation I did not want. The second reason is simpler. It was my house. I had held the flashlight my entire life. I wasn't going to hold the door too. Which brings me to the second Sunday in September. Britta made a dinner. That should have told me something right there. She had never once made a dinner. She had a pork loin and a wild rice hot dish and my mother's church basement bars on a plate with a doily under them. There were 6 of us at the table. Britta and Dustin. My parents, up from Coon Rapids in the Buick. Dustin's parents, Wendell and Loretta Krall, whom I had met exactly twice, both times at a Perkins. Wendell was 64, a lifetime in equipment maintenance up on the range. Loretta was 62 and had run school kitchens in Hibbing for 20 years. They were not monsters. That's important. They were 2 tired people at the end of a hard-working life who had been handed a story about a big house in the city and decided, with all their remaining hope, to believe it. Britta set her fork down. She had rehearsed. You could hear the rehearsal in it. Starting Sunday, Dustin's parents get your room, she said. They already sold their house. You can sleep downstairs. I set down my water glass. You sold your house, I said to Wendell. He nodded, proud. Closed on the 30th of August. 196. He said the number the way men his age say numbers, half of it, assuming you'll fill in the rest. $196,000, for a 2-bedroom on a corner lot in Hibbing that he'd had since 1994. And where are your things? Storage unit in Virginia, Loretta said. We've got 3 trucks lined up. My brother's boys are driving. 3 trucks. 400 miles. Everything they owned. I looked at my mother. My mother looked at the potatoes. It's just for a while, Astrid, she said. Let's not make a thing of it. My father said, family's load-bearing. I want to describe what happened in my chest right then, because it wasn't rage. It was quieter and much colder than rage. It was the feeling I get on a job site when I look up and see that a beam has been notched in the wrong place, and I know that the building is going to come down, and I know it isn't going to be today, and I know that from this second forward I am the only person in the room who can see it. I smiled and said, okay. Britta blinked. She had braced for a fight and I had handed her a Tuesday. Okay, she said. Okay, I said. Pass the bars. 2 nights later it rained 2 inches in 4 hours. I have a habit. After a heavy rain I go down and take moisture readings along the northeast corner of the foundation, the one that settled, and I write them in a composition notebook I keep on the workbench with the date and the time. I have readings in that notebook going back to 2017. It's not a chore. It's how I sleep. So at 11:20 on the night of September 10th, I came down the basement stairs in a t-shirt and wool socks with a flashlight in my teeth, and I went to the bench for my meter. The bench is mine. I built it out of 2x8s in 2016. It's 8 feet long with a maple top and I know where everything on it lives. That night there was a banker's box on it that hadn't been there Sunday. Dustin's office overflow moved down when they cleared the front room for Wendell and Loretta. On top of the box was a manila folder with the flap open, and when I reached over it for my meter case, my sleeve caught the folder and 2 pages slid out onto the maple. I want to be honest about what I did next, because it matters to me that you know I didn't go looking. I picked the pages up to put them back. And I read them, because I am a person who reads a document when it is in her hand. That is what 14 years of contracts does to you. The first page was a Minnesota certificate of rent paid. Form CRP. Tax year 2022. Property address, 2814, Ulysses Street Northeast, Minneapolis, 55418. Renter, Britta Bergland. Rent paid during the year, $17,400. Monthly rent, $1,450. Landlord, Astrid Bergland. And on the landlord's signature line, in blue ink, was my signature. It was a good one. Somebody had traced it. You could see the hesitation marks where the pen had stopped and restarted at the top of the A, the way a traced line always does. A real signature is one motion, a traced one is a series of small decisions. The second page was the same form for tax year 2023. I stood in my basement in wool socks and I felt the temperature of the room change. I did not tear anything up. I did not go upstairs. Instead, I did what I do on a job when I find something wrong inside a wall. I documented it. I set my flashlight on the shelf and turned on the shop light. I took my phone out of my sweatpants pocket. First, I photographed the bench from the bottom of the stairs, wide, so I would have a record of exactly how everything was sitting, the angle of the box, the folder squared to the front left corner of the maple, my meter case behind it. Progress photos. Same as any job. Then I laid each page flat and photographed it straight down with my 25-foot tape pulled out to 12 inches beside it for scale, which is a habit I cannot break and which, that night, turned out to be worth more than everything else I owned. There were 11 pages in the folder. Pages 3 and 4 were copies of Britta's Minnesota property tax refund filings, Form M1PR, for 2022 and 2023, claiming the renter's credit on rent she had never paid. The refunds she'd received were $1,190 and $1,240. $2,430, total, of state money, claimed on my forged signature. Page 5 was a blank rent escrow affidavit from the Hennepin County Housing Court. Page 6 was a blank emergency tenant remedies petition. On page 6, on a yellow sticky note in small square handwriting, it said, "Need 2 violations min, 311 first." Page 7 was a printout of a City of Minneapolis 311 complaint. Filed August 26. Address, 2814 Ulysses Street Northeast. Complaint, unpermitted electrical alteration and structural modification. They had reported my house for the work they had done 9 days before that dinner. Pages 8 and 9 were printed pages of Minnesota statute. Section 504B.231. Unlawful exclusion or removal. The lockout law. Highlighted in yellow was the remedy, treble damages or $500, whichever is greater, plus attorney fees and costs. In the margin, in the same small square handwriting, she'll do it herself. She's a contractor. She can't help it. Page 10 was a note in Britta's round schoolgirl printing, the same printing that used to be on the tags of Christmas presents. It said, "Once the policy cancels, the bank sends the letter. She can't carry it alone. She'll sell to us at $400. Page 11 was nothing. A blank sheet. I photographed it anyway. And while I was standing there, I heard the basement door at the top of the stairs open 6 inches, and I heard Dustin's voice on speakerphone, and I heard Loretta on the other end of it. "Is she gonna change the locks or not?" Loretta said. "Because we're on the road the 24th either way." "She'll change them," Dustin said. "Or she'll pull the meter, or she'll take the storm door off. She's got a truck full of tools and she thinks the house is hers. That's the whole thing, Ma. It's not our word against hers. It's a statute." Britta's voice, further off, laughing at something on her phone. Not even listening. That was almost the worst part. She wasn't the architect. She was just comfortable. "And the insurance," Loretta said. "Complaint's already in," Dustin said. "Inspector writes it up, carrier gets wind, non-renews. Bank sees no policy, bank force places at 4 times the premium, she can't carry it with the mortgage. 6 months, tops." The door shut. I stood absolutely still in my own basement for a long time. Then I put page 11 back, then 10, then 9, all the way up to page 1, in order, flap open at the same angle. I squared the folder to the front left corner of the maple top and set the box down over the corner of it the way it had been. I checked the photo on my phone twice to make sure. I took my moisture readings. Northeast corner, 14%. I wrote it in the notebook with the date and the time, 11:58, because I was not going to let them take that from me either. Let me pause here for a second, because I know some of you are already ahead of me. If you have ever had somebody in your family sign your name to a form, a loan, a lease, a card, drop the word deed in the comments. Just that one word. I want to see how many of us there are, because standing at that bench I was certain I was the only woman in America this had ever happened to, and I was wrong about that by a very large number. Okay. Back upstairs. Then I went up 2 flights of stairs to a room with no trim, and I sat on the edge of a bed under bare rafters, and I did not cry and I did not call anybody. Around 3 o'clock in the morning I understood something that changed everything that came after. They did not want me to fight them. They wanted me to act. They wanted the lockout, the shut-off valve, the removed door, the pulled meter, one hot, human, understandable move from a woman at the end of her rope. That was the whole plan. Every dollar of it depended on me behaving like a person instead of like a contractor. And a contractor doesn't rip anything out until the drawings are stamped. At 7 o'clock the next morning I called Francis Boyum from the cab of my truck in the parking lot of a job site in Egan, with the heater running and my breath fogging the inside of the windshield. I said, "Francis, I need an hour and I need you to tell me what I'm not allowed to do." She said, "That's the first time anybody's ever opened with that." We met Thursday, September 12th, at 9 o'clock in the morning, in her office above a bank on Hennepin Avenue. I paid a retainer of $3,500 and put 11 photographs on her desk in the order the pages had been in the folder. She read them without saying anything for 9 minutes. I timed it, because I time things. Then she took her glasses off and said, "All right. Here is the law, and here is the part you're going to hate. I'm going to give you the whole lesson the way she gave it to me, because this is the part everybody gets wrong." 1. My sister and Dustin were tenants. Not on a lease, not paying rent, but tenants at will, people living in a dwelling with the owner's permission and no fixed term. Under Minnesota law, permission plus possession is enough. The fact that they had never paid me a dime didn't make them squatters. It made them tenants who owed nothing. 2. Because they were tenants, I could not put them out myself. Not 1 inch of it. Changing a lock, taking a door off its hinges, pulling a meter, shutting a valve, moving their property to the curb, every one of those is an unlawful exclusion under Minnesota statutes section 504B.231. The remedy is treble damages or $500, whichever is greater, plus their attorney fees and costs. Interrupting a utility is its own separate violation under 504B.221 with its own separate penalty. Frances put her pen down. "Astrid," she said. "You own a construction company. You have keys, tools, a licensed electrician on staff, and a legitimate, documented reason to be in every mechanical system in that building. If you so much as rekey the side door before a judge says you can, you don't just lose. You hand them a payday and a defense, and every hour of everything you've ever built goes into a settlement." I said, "They know that." "They're counting on it," she said. "It's written on page 9 in your own basement." 3. What I could do, the only thing I could do, was terminate the tenancy the way the statute says to, and then ask a court to give me my house back. A tenancy at will in Minnesota is ended by written notice under section 504B.135. The notice has to run at least as long as the interval between rent payments, or 3 months, whichever is shorter. With no rent at all, the courts treat it as month to month. So a notice delivered in September, to be safe, had to give them the whole of October. Frances drafted it that afternoon. 2 sentences of law and 1 sentence of English. It said that any tenancy at will at 2814 Ulysses Street Northeast was terminated effective October 31, 2024, and that they were required to vacate on or before that date. On Friday, September 13, a licensed process server handed a copy to Dustin Krall on my front porch at 5:42 in the evening. I mailed 2 more copies certified, return receipt requested, 1 to Britta and 1 to Dustin. The green cards came back on September 17. Dustin signed both of them, his signature looping off the end of the little box. I put those green cards in a job binder, on top of a rubber-banded brick of them going back to 2013, lien waivers, change orders, certified notices to owners. That brick is the least romantic object I own, and it has saved me more money than every tool in my truck. Now the part that took me longest to accept. Frances said, "You have to report the CRPs." I said I didn't want revenge. She said, "This isn't revenge. Listen to me. There are now 2 certificates of rent paid on file with the state of Minnesota that say Astrid Bergland is a landlord who collected $17,400 a year of rent at a property she claims as her homestead. You didn't report that income, because it doesn't exist. But the paper exists. If you sit on this and it surfaces later, the person standing in front of the Department of Revenue is you, explaining why you never said anything." That reframed the whole thing for me. I wasn't reporting my sister. I was cleaning up a lie that had been welded to my name without my consent. So on September 19th I filed a written report with the Minnesota Department of Revenue's Fraud Unit. I attached the 2 CRPs, a specimen of my actual signature, my Schedule E showing no rental income for either year, 24 months of bank statements showing no deposits from anyone in my household, and my homestead application. Then I pulled every nail out of every trap they had set, one at a time. I called Lorna Tvet, my insurance agent, and told her the truth before anybody else could tell her a version of it, that 2 adults were living in my home rent-free, that I had documentation that no rent had ever changed hands, and that a fraudulent rental record existed and had been reported. She endorsed the policy correctly and sent me a letter confirming the file was noted. That took 20 minutes and it turned a bomb into a piece of paper in a binder. I called the city of Minneapolis and reported my own house. I gave them the address, the date of the unpermitted work, the retroactive permit number I had already pulled in March, and the name of the master electrician who had corrected it. The inspector came out on September 26th. He looked at the new panel work, the properly headered opening I'd had framed, and the sign-off. He closed the 311 complaint as resolved that same afternoon. Page 7 was now worthless. So were pages 5 and 6, you cannot escrow rent you have never paid, and you cannot bring a tenant remedies action over violations the owner has already corrected. Pages 8 and 9 were worthless because I was never going to touch the locks. Page 10 was worthless because my policy was in force and my mortgage had been current for 8 years. I want to tell you about September 20th, because it is the part 1 I'm proudest of and the part that hurt. I asked Britta to meet me at the Caribou on Central Avenue. She came in 20 minutes late with her sunglasses still on. I slid a printed letter across the table. It offered her this: I would pay first month, last month, and a damage deposit on an apartment of her choosing in Northeast, plus 3 months of rent on top of it. That came to $4,800. I would also pay for 6 sessions with a family mediator Frances had recommended, at $220 an hour, for her and me and our parents, with or without Dustin, her choice. The only condition was that the house be vacant by October 31st. I did not mention the folder. I did not mention the basement. I did not mention that I knew. I said, Britta, I'm not trying to win. I'm trying to get us both out of this without either of us losing something we can't get back. She read the first paragraph. She didn't turn the page. This is our home too, she said. It isn't, I said. It's mine. I'm offering you a soft landing anyway. She pushed the folder back across the table with 2 fingers. Dustin says you can't make us leave, she said. He worked in property management. He knows the law better than your lawyer does. I said, the offer stays open until this is over. And it did. I never withdrew it. That's not a virtue, exactly. It's just that I've been in enough negotiations to know that the only leverage worth having is the kind you don't have to threaten anybody with. I did one more thing that week, and it is the thing that made everything that happened in my driveway possible. On September 16th I sent a certified letter to Wendell and Loretta Krall at the address on their storage unit in Virginia, Minnesota. I kept it to 5 sentences. It said that I was the sole owner of 2814 Ulysses Street Northeast, that no one had authority to invite them to live there, that a notice to vacate had been served on the current occupants, and that they should not sell property or hire movers in reliance on anything they had been told. It said, "Please call me." I put my cell number in it twice. The green card came back on September 21st, signed L. Crawl in careful cursive. They never called. Dustin told them I was bluffing. I know that because Loretta said it out loud later, in the snow, in front of everyone. October 31st came and went. Nobody left. Britta hung a wreath. On November 4th, Frances filed an eviction action in Hennepin County District Court, Housing Calendar, Case 27 CVHC 24-4118. The filing fee was $322. The hearing was set for November 14th at 9 o'clock in the morning, in the Government Center on South 6th Street. The hearing took 26 minutes. Dustin represented himself and my sister, which Frances had told me he would, because men like Dustin always believe that the only thing standing between them and a law degree is the tuition. He wore a suit jacket over a hooded sweatshirt. He called the referee Your Honor 14 times. Frances put in the deed, the mortgage statement, the homestead classification, the notice to vacate, the certified mail receipts with Dustin's own signature on them, and my tax returns for 2022 and 2023 showing no rental income. Then Dustin stood up and said, "Your Honor, we're not guests, we're tenants. We pay rent. I have documentation." And he handed up the CRPs. Frances didn't move. She had told me the night before that if he did that, I was not to react in any way at all, and I didn't. I sat with my hands flat on my knees. The referee looked at the forms. Then she looked at a note in the file. Then she looked at Dustin over her glasses for what felt like a long time. "Mr. Crawl," she said, "these documents are already the subject of a fraud report filed by the plaintiff with the Department of Revenue on September 19th. Do you want to withdraw this exhibit?" He said, Can I withdraw it?" "You've handed it up," she said. Britta turned around and looked at me for the first time all morning. She had our grandmother's face. "I want you to know I felt that. I have never in my life wanted so badly to be wrong about somebody." Judgment for the plaintiff. Writ of recovery of premises and order to vacate, issued November 15th, stayed 7 days. Which brought us to the 22nd. And to the 23rd. The Hennepin County Sheriff's Civil Process Division posted the 24-hour notice on my storm door at 2:15 on Friday afternoon, November 22nd. It's printed on colored paper so it can't be missed, and it gets taped to the glass at eye height, and if you have never seen one on a house you love, I hope you never do. I was standing in the driveway when the deputy taped it up. He said, "Ma'am, is anybody still inside?" I said, 3 people and about 40 boxes. He wrote that down. Saturday, November 23rd was 9 degrees at dawn with 4 inches of old snow on the ground and that hard blue light you only get here in November, the kind that makes everything look like it's been cut out with scissors. Everybody was in position by 8:30. There were 2 deputies from Civil Process at the top of the driveway, one of them holding the writ on a clipboard. Frances Boyum stood at the curb by her Subaru in a parka over a suit, holding a red-welled file with both arms like a schoolbook. Odell and 2 of my carpenters sat in the company van with the engine running and a milk crate of new deadbolts on the middle seat, under strict instructions from me: nobody touches this house, not the door, not the storm door, not a single screw, until a deputy says out loud that the eviction is complete. I sat on my own front steps in my work jacket with a thermos. Across the street, Mrs. Ochoa was out with her dog and did not go back inside. The man at 2810 started his snowblower and then shut it off. On this block, on a Saturday in November, everybody is outside anyway. That's how it was public. Nobody had to be invited. At 8:40 the trucks came up Ulysses Street. A 26-foot rental in the lead, then a pickup with an enclosed trailer, then another. 400 miles from Virginia, Minnesota, overnight, with 2 of Wendell's nephews driving. They had to stop halfway up the block because the deputies' vehicles were in the way, and the air brakes on the rental let go with that long sigh, and then it got very quiet on my street. Wendell Crawl climbed down from the cab in a Carhartt coat and a stocking cap, grinning, rubbing his hands, looking up at the roofline of my house the way a man looks at the last good thing that's going to happen to him. Then he saw the colored paper on the storm door. He walked up and read it with his lips moving. He read it twice. He held it out sideways to Loretta without looking away from it. Loretta read it. She said, "What's a writ?" Britta came out onto the porch in a robe and unlaced boots with a coffee in her hand, saw two deputies standing in her driveway, and stopped so fast the coffee came over the rim onto her wrist and she didn't seem to feel it. Dustin came out behind her already talking. Okay, hang on. There's a pending motion. We filed. There's a stay. The taller deputy said, "Sir, there's a writ." There's a motion, sir. There's a writ. You've got the time it takes me to read this to get your personal items. That was when Wendell went to the truck. He wasn't doing anything dramatic. He was doing what men like my father do when a situation gets too big. He went to get the paperwork, the registration, and the insurance card, because paperwork is how you prove you're a serious person. He opened the passenger door of the pickup and popped the center console. And it was all in there. The summons. The complaint. The court's order. The notice of writ. Folded in thirds, held with a binder clip, sitting on top of a road atlas and a package of jerky. Wendell picked it up because it was in his way. Loretta took it out of his hands. She unfolded it in the driveway, with 3 trucks idling behind her and half the block watching, and she read it out loud, because she was a school kitchen manager for 20 years and reading things out loud is what you do when you can't understand them silently. Hennepin County District Court. Astrid Bergland, plaintiff. Britta Bergland and Dustin Crawl, defendants. She turned the page. Hearing, November 14th. She looked up. Dustin. That was 9 days ago. Then she found the second page, the acknowledgement of service, and there was her son's signature, the one that loops off the end of the box, dated September 13th. Loretta Crawl sat down on the loading ramp of a 26-foot rental truck in 9-degree weather. We sold the house, she said. Not to him. To nobody. Dustin. We sold the house. Wendell walked away. He went about 60 feet down the sidewalk and stopped and stood with his back to all of us, and he stayed there for a long time with his hands on top of his head. Britta's phone slid out of her hand and went face down into the snow beside the step. And then she came at me, and I want to tell you exactly what she said, because it's the sentence I hear when I can't sleep. We don't have anywhere to go. That was the true part. Her face was open. For about 4 seconds she was 11 years old on a basement floor holding a flashlight steady for 40 minutes. I said, I know. And then the mask came back down. So you're just going to stand there and let your own sister freeze? In November? What is wrong with you? If you have ever had to be the calm one in your family while everybody else got to be the emotional one, hit subscribe. What I said next took me 27 years to be able to say. My parents' Buick pulled up at the bottom of the driveway at 8:55, because of course it did. My mother got out first in her good coat. Astrid, she said, it's November. My father came around the front of the car with his hands in his pockets, the same way he stood in his driveway in 2020, and he said, family's load-bearing, Astrid. I stood up off my steps. Dad, I said. A load-bearing wall carries exactly what it was designed to carry. Nobody adds a second story and then blames the wall for cracking. I turned to Britta. I'm not throwing you out. I asked a court to, and the court agreed. You're my sister, I've been the wall in this family since I was 10 years old, I said. I'm done being load-bearing. Then I did the last thing, and I did it in front of my mother and my father and Loretta and the deputies and Mrs. Ochoa and her dog, because I wanted witnesses. I took the letter out of my jacket. The same one from September 20th, folded in the same folder, with the same date on it. The offer I made you on the 20th of September is still open until noon today, I said. First month, last month, damage deposit, and 3 months of rent. $4,800. Plus the mediation. Say yes and I will write the check on the hood of that truck right now. Britta looked at it. She looked at Dustin, who was still arguing with the deputy about a motion that did not exist. I'm not taking your charity, she said. I folded the letter and put it back in my pocket. Okay, I said. At 10:20 the taller deputy came over and told me the premises were clear and the eviction was complete, and only then did I wave Odell up from the van. Britta was standing on the walk with a laundry basket of shoes. She held out her key ring with the red fob on it, toward me, wanting me to take it, wanting there to be a moment. Give it to the deputy, I said. It goes on his inventory. Here's what happened after, and I want to be careful how I tell it, because none of it was done by me. Wendell and Loretta Krall had sold a paid-off 2-bedroom house on a corner lot in Hibbing, a house they had owned since 1994, for $196,000. They had put most of it into a joint account and told themselves they would not need much, living in the city with their son. By Christmas they were back up north in a rented unit in Virginia, Minnesota, paying $985 a month plus $189 a month for the storage unit that still had their dining room set in it, because the new place didn't have a dining room. Wendell went back to work at 64, part-time, behind a parts counter. He had retired in June. He was retired for 5 months. I didn't do that. They did that. They sold a house on the strength of a promise made by someone who did not own the thing he was promising, and they never once picked up a phone and called the woman whose name was on the deed. I know they got my letter. I have the green card with Loretta's careful cursive on it. The Department of Revenue finished its review in June. My sister was ordered to repay the renter's credits she had claimed on rent she never paid, $1,190 for 2022, $1,240 for 2023, $2,430 in all, plus penalty and interest. I was asked in February to provide a specimen of my signature and a written statement about who had access to my desk. I provided both. That is the last thing I ever did in that matter, and I have never asked anyone how the rest of it came out. I don't want to know. Whatever it is, she chose it in a quiet room with a pen in her hand, and it isn't mine to carry. Britta and Dustin lasted 11 weeks after the driveway. He was furious that she hadn't gotten anything in writing from me in 3 years. She was furious that he had signed for a summons on September 13th and hidden it in a truck console for 71 days and let his own parents drive 400 miles into it. They fought about it in a rented room in Fridley until February, and then he went back to St. Cloud, and the engagement ended over a phone bill and a dog. My sister works at a med spa in Columbia Heights and picks up shifts at a restaurant on Central. She rents a studio for $1,095 a month. She pays it herself. That's the first time in her adult life that sentence has been true, and I don't say it with any satisfaction at all. I say it because it's the actual ending, and the actual ending is that she is fine, and that she had to become fine without me. In April she texted me. It said, I need to borrow 2 months. That's all it said. I wrote back, the mediation offer is still open. 6 sessions. I'll pay for all of them and I'll go to every one. I renewed that offer in writing in January and I've renewed it twice since. She read it. She didn't answer. The offer stands. It will always stand. That's the only door I'm still holding open, and I'm holding it open with my foot, from the other side. My parents were harder. In January their water heater went out. It was 11 below. My mother called me at 6:40 in the morning and started the sentence the way she has started it my whole life, with a little laugh in front of it, and I stopped her. I said, Mom, I'll help. I'll get you 3 bids by noon and I'll be sitting in your kitchen when the guy comes and I'll make sure nobody sells you a tank you don't need. I'm not writing the check. There was a silence on that phone long enough that I checked the screen to see if it had dropped. She said, well. Then she said, that's different. I got them the bids. The middle one was $1,780, which was fair. I sat at their kitchen table while it was installed and I made the installer walk me through the expansion tank because that's who I am. My parents paid for it out of an account they'd had since 1986. My father didn't speak to me for 4 months. Not a fight. Nothing so vulgar as a fight. Just the Minnesota version, pleasant at church, nothing on the phone, a Christmas card signed by my mother with both their names in her handwriting. Then on a Tuesday in April he came to my shop off Broadway Street Northeast at 7:20 in the morning, before anybody else was in, and he stood in the door in his good jacket holding something wrapped in a shop towel. It was his father's steel framing square. Solveig's husband bought it in Hibbing in 1961. It has his initials filed into the tongue. He set it on my desk. He looked at the wall for a while. Then he said, "I put too much on you." That's it. That's the whole speech. 7 words from a man who drove haul truck for 28 years. I said, "I know, Dad." He said, "Well," and he went out to the Buick, and we've had coffee every second Saturday since. There's one more person. My cousin Tova is 24. She helped my sister carry boxes into my house in 2021 and she was at that dinner table in September, at the end, near the wall, not saying anything. In August she had sent me a text that said just be careful, okay, and when I asked her what she meant she had gone quiet for 3 weeks. She came to the shop in December and cried in my truck for 20 minutes and said she should have told me what she'd overheard at Thanksgiving, and that she was 24 and scared of my mother and scared of being the one who made a thing of it. I told her the truth. I told her that she was young, that she had been raised in the same silence I was raised in, and that I forgave her, and that I meant it. And then I told her the boundary, because forgiveness without a boundary is just another way of volunteering. I said, "You are always welcome in my house. You can never carry a message into it. If somebody in this family asks you to tell me something, tell them my number hasn't changed." She comes for dinner about once a month. She has never once brought a message. As for me, I finished the attic. 6 weeks in January and February, mostly nights, Cortison oak casings milled to match the 1913 profile, because Odell had the knives ground for it. When it was done I moved back down to the front bedroom with the window seat, and now the 3rd floor is a guest room, and the first person who ever slept in it was Odell's granddaughter. Odell owns 15% of Bergland Build. His name is on the millwork shop and his son runs the CNC. He finished my dining room built-ins on the 8th of March, 11 months late, and the first meal at that table was 16 people from my crew and his family, and we used every chair in the house and 2 from the garage. And in May, Bergland Build was awarded a 63-unit senior housing project in Hibbing. I drove up alone the week we broke ground. I stood on a frozen pad on the edge of a town my grandmother worked in for 31 years, in the wind, in a hard hat, holding a set of drawings with my stamp on them, about a mile and a half from the office where Solveig Bergland typed shipping manifests so her son could have a down payment someday. I thought, she never made a thing of it either. Not once, her whole life. Somebody in a family has to be the one who finally says it out loud. That's my story. 3 things came out of that house with me, and I keep all of them where I can see them. A green certified mail receipt card with the signature of the man who almost became my brother-in-law looping off the end of the box. A 25-foot tape measure, because a woman who measures things twice does not have to shout. And a red key fob that I never touched again, because it went on a deputy's inventory sheet where it belonged, and not into my hand. Here's what that year taught me. Being the strong one in a family is not the same thing as being the loved one, and if you have never been allowed to say no, then every yes you have ever given was just the sound of a wall holding. You are allowed to be a person in your own house. If you've made it this far, thank you for spending this hour with me on my channel. If any of this sounded like your family, tell me in the comments. I read them, all of them, and I answer more than you'd think. Share this with the one person you know who is always the one who pays. And subscribe, because next week I'm telling you about a woman whose mother-in-law handed her an itemized bill for Christmas dinner, at the table, in front of both her sons, and what her husband's grandmother had already put in writing 6 years before she died. I'll see you then. Stay warm.